Crafting in Destiny was a welcomed addition to the game, but over time the community has become unsatisfied with how crafting has been maintained. Today, we will have a look into the beginnings of crafting, where I think crafting went wrong, and where it should go from here. Crafting was revealed during the Witch Queen showcase in August 2021, and at the time there was positive reception to the concept. It wasn't until February 2022 that we received more information on how it would work, which is vastly different to how crafting worked at launch and how it works now. Before Witch Queen, crafting was described to work like so. You would unlock the pattern of a weapon through quests or gameplay objectives, and unlock traits by extracting them from random weapons that drop with something called Deep Sight Resonance. This was essentially an objective, referred to as attunement, tackled onto the gun, which when completed allowed you to extract the essence of one of the traits. You could then craft a weapon with that same or similar trait. Now, crafting was a little different when Witch Queen actually launched. You unlocked patterns when completing a certain number of attunements for each weapon, and traits became available depending on the level of a crafted weapon and required certain materials. Both attunement and leveling were progressed through kills and activity completions. The players would often frequent Shuro-Chi thanks to large groupings of low health enemies. There were still certain weapons that you could unlock through quests like Originally Intended, the Enigma, which introduced you to crafting, Dragonhold D, Sympathiation 53, Palomira B, Osteostriga, and your first exotic glaive. We haven't really seen any more quests for unlocking patterns since around the Witch Queen launch. The closest thing we have to that in current Destiny are the crafting exotics from the seasonal exotic missions. Bungie also introduced a lot of materials with the crafting system at launch, which was actually much less than they had originally intended. The original goal was to have a material for each unique trait. There were 84 unique traits throughout all crafted weapons on launch, so it's no surprise that the idea was scrapped. Instead, there were the following materials: Resonant Alloy, Neutral Element, Ruinous Element, Energetic Element, Mutable Element, Adroit Element, Drowned Element, Ascendant Alloy, and Drowned Alloy. Unfortunately, they were not implemented well at all. The only way to obtain half of those materials was through completing the attunement of a deep sight weapon. This meant that players were either hoarding deep sights if they had reached the material caps, which started low but were eventually raised, or players were struggling to obtain the materials required as there was no direct path to obtaining them. You simply had to hope that you found a weapon with deep sight that also had the type of traits you wanted to extract materials from. This was even worse for raid weapons, which required Drowned Alloy and Drowned Element to craft and enhance respectively. These were obtained from dismantling and completing the attunements of raid weapons, which are a rare commodity due to only being able to obtain gear from a raid once a week per character. Don't forget it's possible to get armor instead of a weapon from an encounter. It was not possible to have the quantity of weapons needed for this system to realistically work. Thankfully, it did not take Bungie long to realise the painful issues of crafting. At the launch of Season of the Haunted, Bungie removed multiple elements from the game. The removal of other materials would quickly follow, and flash forward to the current implementation of crafting, and all but one of the original materials have been removed in favour of a more streamlined system. There is no longer an attunement objective. Instead, you can immediately claim the pattern progress through the weapon screen or by dismantling. Ascendant Alloy is still required for enhanced traits, with Glimmer and Cause being used to slot in your masterwork traits and perks. These changes were received well by the community, but it wasn't long until further issues with crafting became evident. A god roll in Destiny is typically defined as a 5 out of 5 weapon. You have your desired masswork, perks, and traits, and it is a long-form chase for perfection that can keep players engaged with activities. But is a god roll required? No. In most cases, all you really need to care about are the 2 traits. The exception to that is in the Crucible, where in certain stats like range or handling can be very beneficial, but you aren't punished for not having the perfect roll. With weapon crafting, that long-form chase becomes lessened and removes the reason for playing activity. You go from doing an activity for a chance to getting the weapon you want with the traits you want, whether that be 2 specific traits or a 5 out of 5 roll, to only doing an activity so many times until you have that weapon crafted, because now you have access to all masterwork traits and perks without doing anything other than spend materials. What makes this worse is that you are unable to enhance a weapon if it is possible to craft that weapon. You may get your desired roll before you claim enough patterns to craft it, but that version of the weapon will always be inferior to a crafted version as you cannot enhance the perks. Crafting does have a place in Destiny, just not to the extent where loot revolves around it. There should be no crafting for new guns. Instead, implement crafting for returning weapons or weapons that are currently in the game but have their roles updated. I don't believe that you should be expected to go through the same grind again to obtain old weapons you've already earned. In places where crafting is implemented, it must be a stepping stone and not the end goal like it is currently. The easiest way to do this is by allowing non-crafted versions of craftable weapons to be enhanced. This way you can actually use a weapon without it being inferior to its crafted counterpart, which they currently are as they do not have access to enhanced traits. Crafted weapons should be an alternative path to your ideal goal instead of the end goal. Then we're left with non-craftable weapons. The reason people like crafting is because it minimizes the amount of RNG you're engaging with. If you're farming for a specific non-craftable weapon, you first need the gun to drop, then you need it to drop with 2 specific traits, and then if you really care, you need it to drop with a specific masterwork and perks. That's RNG on top of RNG on top of more RNG, and it's not enjoyable, especially when you're only getting one piece of loot from somewhere like a dungeon encounter. There are 3 solutions to the RNG issue that I can see. The first would be to increase the amount of loot you receive throughout the entire game. In dungeons and raids specifically, I think a system where you get bonus gear equal to the amount of consecutive encounters you complete would encourage players to run a raid or dungeon from start to finish, while also rewarding them adequately. Then the second is weapon focusing. You would select the type of weapon you want to focus, and then future drops would have a high chance to be that type of weapon. Finally, the third is trait focusing. Like with the original crafting system, there'd be 4 categories of traits. Trait focusing would allow you to select one category for each slot, and future drops will then be more likely to roll with those type of traits. I do not think that this needs to extend to masterwork and perks, as we don't want to trivialize weapon farming, but instead make it more bearable. Weapon and trait focusing would likely work best game-wide as opposed to activity-specific, as otherwise there's going to be a lot of repetitive actions using the system, especially if you're hopping from one activity to another. The focusing would work similar to the Tomb of Want from episode Heresy, where after so many uses you'll have to reactivate the focusing, though it would remain active until the end of the current activity you're in. This is to prevent players from having to stop what they're doing and go into the menus to refocus, which isn't viable if you're mid-encounter. And no video on crafting would be complete without a brief mention of the Craftening, an event in Destiny's history where through unintended methods you were able to put the frames and traits of one weapon on another, leading to weird things like this. Crafting definitely has a place in Destiny, just not to the extent that it is currently. Thankfully, Bungie's already begun to listen to how the community feels on its current state. As of the last 2 episodes, Revenant and Heresy, seasonal weapons have not been craftable, and instead we have had weapon focusing in the form of tonics and the Tomb of Want, which work outside of episode activities. The last 2 dungeons have also had gear focusing, where you can enter a code to get the gear tied to it, though this only works once a week per character. Bungie is definitely walking on the right path so far, and I hope they continue to do so and find the right balance between crafting and randomly dropped weapons.